Hi, this is Matt Caffrey again. On behalf of myself and my co-chair, Sebastian Bay, and all the members of our Wargaming Education Working Group, I want to thank you for watching this, if it's live or later on YouTube. It's a very important subject. Um, One of the things that kind of illustrate the impact of being good at educating wargaming is that we spend a fair amount of money on modeling simulation. I think it's a good investment. We spend a fair amount of money on wargaming infrastructure, buildings, and things like that. But how good are the people who actually conduct the war games? How effective? And a good analogy to this is during the Vietnam War, we were not doing very well air to air against the North Vietnamese or the people identifying themselves as North Vietnamese. Um, After having a very favorable exchange ratio during the Korean War, when it came to Vietnam, there were a few brief periods where we were losing more pilots than we were shooting down, and we were at 1 point something to one most of the war. And there was a study done called the Red Baron study that tried to get as much data as they could about every engagement, hoping something would jump out at them. And something did. Almost all the pilots that were shot down during the Vietnam War were shot down on their first 8 missions. And the conclusion drawn from that was that we were doing a good job of teaching our pilots how to fly, but we weren't teaching them how to fight. There was a lot of emphasis on avoiding peacetime casualties, on making sure our education of pilots was safe, it wasn't too much money. And so as a result, air to air training was very much, um, had very much atrophied. Not the case with the pilots on the other side. And so if our pilots could survive their first 8 missions, they got on the job training and they became effective. And so we established in the Navy the Top Gun program. I think there was a movie on that subject. And in the case of the Air Force, we later established Red Flag and the emphasis on the weapons school and all the rest. And it had an impact. The Navy went first. They started Top Gun before Red Flag. And when their Top Gun graduates went back to Vietnam, they did much, much better in air to air combat. So the hardware was important, the weapons were important, all the infrastructure was important, but the missing element was the education of the pilots. Well, I think the same would apply to wargaming, that the infrastructure is important, the modeling simulation is important, all important. I'm not denigrating any of that, but we have several adversaries and they all wargame. And at least in one case, it appears they spend a lot of time and money to make sure their wargamers are as effective as possible. So it's very important that we expand and improve the education in how to conduct effective wargaming within the U.S. among our friends and allies. So a very important working group. So next slide. So this is kind of the timeline of what we're trying to do. This working group was very much focused on papers. That there wasn't much, the whole group doing research into something and coming back together. Not a lot of meetings. It was mainly individual or pairs of individuals working together to provide papers, and they're coming along pretty well. Next slide. Okay, so we did meet during the conference. We were one of the workshops in this area, and we basically focused on helping each other. We would review each other's papers and talk about what more could be done, what other sources there might be, what other arguments might be possible. Next. So first one the paper we talked about was nuclear wargaming for policy makers, and extremely important stuff. They ran really advanced the state of the art in the late 50s, early 60s. There's some very important wargaming in this area. One of the problems the author found is how do you get um, wargaming in this area before members of Congress, before people of high level? How do you make sure that it's enough of an all of government approach? And we were able to talk about what's out there that already does reach the highest levels of government, that already does do all of government approaches. President Eisenhower established a wargaming function called Studies, Analysis, and Gaming within the Joint Staff the Gaming Division. It's still there, and so talked about it to the author, and also other areas where we could strengthen the paper and make sure that they're talking to everybody they should, and the paper reaches everybody it should. Next. Okay, then we also had a paper on wargaming for social science, and this is again a very important subject. And it's important for a couple of reasons. One, uh, as we look forward to warfare in the gray zone, all domain warfare, um, wargaming in the gray areas, then attrition stays important, but a lot of the more social science type of things become proportionately more important. And the second is, I like to talk about how war games save lives, but if you're in war, people are going to die, and if you have fewer die, that's a virtuous thing, that's an ethical thing. If you minimize the death as much as you can, but the real way to minimize death is to avoid war altogether. And wargaming that looks at the social sciences, that use wargaming techniques, but looks at uh, could there be a way that active hot war is avoided or postponed and postponed again and postponed again. Uh, that's a pretty virtuous thing to do too. So, how do we advance wargaming in an area where the social sciences play a very big part? Next. Okay, and then next up is sponsoring wargame education, and this one is looking at um, how do we educate people in wargaming? Sponsor. I'm sorry, it's been a long week. Um, if you go back 5 years, go back 10 years, very little education on wargaming. Some of the little that was being done was Jeff Applegate at the Naval Postgraduate School. One of the things that really made me very happy is just the number of people in this working group. It shows that more people are working in the area of war game education. And Jeff is a pioneer again because the focus of his paper and Rob Burke's is how do we educate the sponsors of wargaming? Uh, and this is very important too, because if the wargamers are doing good work and the sponsors don't understand the capabilities and limitations of wargaming, then they may not call for wargaming where wargaming is the right application. They may not uh, take some wargaming outcomes sufficiently seriously, and they may put too much credence in other outcomes. So his paper looking at what can be done, what should be done in to educate our sponsors so that the sponsor Wargame Designer dialogue is more productive and more effective is really sadly kind of groundbreaking and will be one of the more important parts of our overall effort. Next. Okay. Next is improving wargaming education. And this looks at wargaming education overall and how can we be more effective in training people in how to do wargaming effectively. As you and again, this paper is part of that shows that this is not just a U.S. effort, but an effort that's truly international. And very important paper, one that I think will fulfill a very important role. Next. Okay, and in pre-commissioning wargaming, this is a particularly important one. One of the challenges we have is how to get people who are set in their ways uh, into a place where they will use war games to its best effect. Well, pre-commissioning, they're not set in their ways. If we can make wargaming part of the pre-commissioning pipeline, then we have folks coming into the service already aware of wargames' capabilities and limitations, hopefully capable of knowing when to apply wargaming as their responsibilities grow. And if we catch them on their way into the military, then as they advance in rank, they will retain this appreciation for wargaming and carry it forward with them through their careers. Next. Then we have, I'm sorry, and then next slide. Okay. Then PME is military speak for professional military education, and professional military education is again the schools that we send our officers to after they've been commissioned, but as they're going up through the ranks. So most militaries have a school for captains, a school for majors, a school for lieutenant colonels, and this is not just true in the United States. As you may have noticed, our authors are Australian officers, and they're talking about what can be done to better integrate wargaming in their intermediate service schools, advanced service schools, and it was both um, comforting and discouraging to hear that the problems they're having in Australia are very similar to problems that I had in the U.S. Air Force, and as the other members of our group spoke up, problems that occur in the U.S. Marine Corps and elsewhere. And Sebastian, I think, said it best. Professional military education is a zero-sum game. You only have the students for a fixed amount of time. And anything you add into the curriculum means that something that's in the curriculum today has to come out. And so it's not that the schools are anti-wargaming, it's the schools are pro what they've already got in their curriculum. So we talked about some of the ways that some people in different places have been able to cope with that dynamic. One of the areas where commercial war games may be showing us the way is that you have 14-year-olds downloading commercial war games off Steam and playing them at home without any 4-hour training session or without being in a classroom. So one tactic is perhaps looking for ways that war games could be assigned as homework, so you're not taking away from the contact hours that's already been being allocated to something else. But that's just one point, and there's a lot more that needs to be covered. And in some cases, another strategy is you're not asking for time from something else for wargaming, but using wargaming within existing subject matter to help uh, improve the effectiveness of the education that's already taking place. One thing, though, that was touched on a little bit is that we use wargaming to help us teach more effectively. At least one of our adversaries in their intermediate and advanced service schools teach people how to use war games to better defeat us after they graduate. And it would be worthwhile to find room in the curriculum to help educate these students so that they can employ wargaming after graduation. Next. And then here's an interesting challenge, and that is that there are general officers that participate in war games. There's an Air Force war game that the team leads are major generals and the players are brigadiers, and this raises a lot of different interesting considerations. Journal officer time is really, really precious. These poor guys don't have time to blink. Their calendars tend to be written for them well in advance. And so there's a real burden on making sure that their time is well used. And one of the things that came out of this discussion is that different services all have areas where general officers are the players, or at least participate or observe or are part of the process of wargaming. And so the members of our group from different services were able to compare notes. The good major is from the U.S. Army. As you can see, the Center for Army Analysis is the organization that he works for. So people from other services were able to speak up and talk about the experiences they've had in that area, and hopefully help the good major write an even more robust paper. Next. Okay, and then this is a fascinating paper. It was written by Sawyer Judge, which is one of the really insightful and very young folks in wargaming. And she talks about, is wargaming an art or a science, and what evidence would support a conclusion one way or the other. And this is a fairly this isn't just a discussion of terminology. It has consequences, because if wargaming is an art, you teach art in a certain way. If wargaming is a science, the approach to teaching science is very different. And right now, there seems to be a fair amount of agreement that wargaming is both. And there was some discussion as to would wargaming be more effective if the art part was taught more effectively, or if the science part was taught more effectively. And I, Matt Caffrey, personally feel the answer is yes. Me personally, I feel that wargaming is more like architecture than any other field of human endeavor. We had an architecture course at my otherwise purely engineering school, and their curriculum included art and science, because a architect that only knows the science designs an ugly, ineffective building, and an architect that knows only the art designs really beautiful buildings that fall down. So uh, both art and science are very important to architecture. Both art and science are very important to wargaming. And I think we owe Sawyer a debt of gratitude to bringing this up and getting this conversation explicitly addressed. And very much looking forward not only to the publication of this paper, but the things that she'll be doing in the years to come. Next. I thought that was the last one. Okay, well, we only have a half an hour block and we only have 9 minutes left. So I don't know if there's any questions that came through the chat. If so, my good producer is going to be putting them along the bottom. If not, I just want to again mention that this whole subject is very, very important. We need wargaming infrastructure. A lot of the improvements to our wargaming effectiveness is going to come from a cooperative and friendly relationship with the modeling and simulation part of the field. But just as wargaming is both an art and a science, we need not only tools and infrastructure, but we need wargame designers, we need wargame sponsors, we need wargame participants that are better educated in how to get the most value out of that infrastructure, the most value out of those tools, the most value out of wargaming. And it's very reassuring to me that there are now enough people teaching wargaming that we have a sufficient number even to form this working group, and then to see the good work done by all of them is really quite heartening. So I'm running out of comments.
Well, Matt, we do have a comment that
Good.
I'd like to have you take a look at and get your take on.
Oh, okay. Yes, yes, yes. Well, that's a very good comment, and I was a teenager at the time, so I don't have firsthand knowledge. But I'm more impressed that the Navy was able to put Top Gun together that fast, and was able to, and the Hoyt report also helped, and was able to get that ginned up, get it executed, and get the graduates back in time to have an impact on the Vietnam War. Red Flag did take longer. It was after the war, but it was more comprehensive than Top Gun, in that it was not only the air to air fight, but really the full air fight on both sides with ground control intercepts and a model enemy country out in the desert, and quite a few other enhancements. So that was going to take longer. But we talk about inter-service rivalry and how bad it is, and beat Army and go Navy and all the rest. There's something to be said to have more than one service. So if one service is taking a little bit longer, you can get something from the other, or if one service misses a beat, you can get something from the other. And I know from firsthand experience, and we need to do even more of it, the services watch what each other's doing, not just to out of rivalry, but just, is the Army doing something smart we can learn from? Is the Navy doing something smart that we can plagiarize and give them credit? Maybe small print, but and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But very good comment, and yeah, it is a little embarrassing that Red Flag didn't get going until after the war. But understandable. Any other comments, questions, observations?
No, that's it, Matt.
Okay, well, I made the half an hour goal. So thank you all for watching, regardless of when you're watching. And the education of wargaming is something that we have not done historically. We've used war games to educate. We haven't truly educated our folks to conduct wargaming after graduation. The German army did, the Soviet army did, and I think that was a competitive relative weakness. Now, we managed to beat the Germans anyway, but as we look to a future where our adversaries are going to be catching up to a disconcerting degree technologically, and our adversaries are catching up to a disconcerting degree in industrial capacity and everything else, our principal advantage will be our ability to innovate. And they innovate too. So we need to innovate more effectively and more quickly than they do in order to hang on to that advantage. And I personally believe one of the keys to innovating more effectively and more quickly is the exploitation of wargaming. And if you're going to do that, you're going to need people who have been educated in how to task wargamers and how to create wargaming. And we can't rely on the job training and the luck of a hobbyist enlisting, as we couldn't rely on our pilots getting on the job training in the skies over Vietnam. We need to get the education of wargaming within the United States, within our friends and our allies, as not a nice to have, but one of the keys to our future deterrence of conflict, and if deterrence fails, to prevail. And because this is so important, I want to again thank every member of the working group. Thank Sebastian Bay, who did way more work on this effort than I did. And thank you for watching now. That's all I have. Bye-bye.